In the previous daily video, we talked about some reasons why you might have a discrepancy between your practice test score and your real test score for the old SAT, new SAT, ACT, or any standardized test that you might take, right? So you take, let's say, the ACT, and on your practice test, you were getting a composite score of 31, and then you're really confident going into test day, and then when you get your test back from the real thing, you got a 25. And super mysterious, super disturbing that there'd be that discrepancy. But in the previous video, I gave you some reasons that could account for, more. One of those reasons could be it for you. Maybe it's a combination, but a set of reasons that could explain some of the discrepancy. So what I want to do in this video is talk about, given those reasons, given those problems, what can we do to try to make our practice tests more accurate and make our practice tests give us scores that are closer to the real thing so that we can be as accurate with our practice tests as we can be so that there are not as many surprises. And again, there's always going to be variance. You could do better on your real test than your practice test. I've seen that before, right? So you don't just have to do worse, but you want to be at least close to what your practice test score was. Within, say, 100 points for the SAT, within 2-3 points for the ACT. So what are some things to do? And each of these reasons is based off of, each of these approaches is based off of the reasons we discussed in the previous video. So the first thing you can do is you want to take multiple practice tests, not just one. This helps you get a sampling of where you're at in your personal range. There's always variance, as we talked about with the test. There's always going to be variations in the scores you get just from day to day, luck, chance, etc. So the more practice tests you take, the better sense you get of where you're at. So that if you just take one, maybe that's an outlier. Maybe you just did really well on that test, or something happened where you did really great on it, whereas maybe on other tests you wouldn't do as well. You want to take multiple practice tests, get an average score, rather than taking 1, 2, or even just 3 tests and using that as a baseline. I know I'm going to get the question, how many tests should I take then? I mean, it depends on your situation. I would say 6 or more practice tests, if you want to know exactly where you're at, would be useful. But for most people, that's not super realistic. Again, this is just a number to take if you want to make sure your score is super accurate. But this is just my own number. I kind of pulled out of thin air, so it doesn't really mean much. You could probably run a statistical analysis of this. Well, I haven't. But again, you don't have to do 6 or more tests. It's just if you want to get that sense. Though most of you probably are going to be doing 6 or more tests, so it's fine. Preparation and relaxation. So this is to combat the test anxiety. I'm going to talk more about this because this is an issue that affects so many people. So I will be making videos on this in the future if this is something that affects you. But in order to beat test anxiety, there's 2 major pillars. One is preparation. A lot of times when people say they don't test well or they're anxious in tests, it's because they're not prepared. And listen, if I didn't prepare for a test, I would be anxious too. I mean, because I would know I'm not prepared, right? So that's a big part of it. You have to be prepared. You have to prepare in the right ways. You got to put in the work ahead of time. When you go into the test knowing you've prepared yourself properly, it takes a lot of the load off and it's just time to perform. But then even beyond that, it's about relaxation. It's about performance. And the analogy I like to use here is sports with clutch players. Whether or not that exists, hold that aside. There are just some players that seem to do well in pressure situations and other players that don't do well in pressure situations, even if their talent level is the same, if they're both as skilled. And it's kind of the same thing with tests, right? Some people do really well. Like, I think I'm a really good test taker where I harness my anxiety, harness the stress that we all feel when we take a test, and I harness it to keep me focused and to do what I have to do to execute. Whereas other people, that anxiety tears them apart and they don't do as well. So a lot of it's temperament, a lot of it's experience, whatever it may be. But relaxation techniques may help. Meditation, anything that you can come up with to help bring you to a more centered, calm level will help you with your anxiety. Like I said, I'll make more videos about this later just because this is something that I think a lot of people struggle with. Make sure your practice tests are realistic. So use real practice tests. Time yourself in the way that you're going to be timed on test day. Use bubble sheets to record your answers. Don't do the test at home if possible. If you have a library or a school or some neutral place that's quiet, that simulates the testing environment, that will be really helpful, right? The more you can simulate the environment, the better. And along those lines, if you can get someone to proctor the test for you, even if you can get the script for how they read the instructions and have the proctor read the instructions for you, maybe a parent, or if a group of your friends are taking a test, maybe a teacher will do it, or maybe your tutor or somebody. Getting someone to proctor the test for you will be super helpful to simulate that experience. So try to make your practice test experience as realistic as you can. As we talked about in the previous video, however, you can't 100% simulate test day. Nothing will be able to capture the idea, conscious or subconscious, that when you're taking the real test, that it's the real thing, that it counts. And that pressure cannot be simulated, but at least you can get really close. Retake the practice test. So your experience, when you've taken the practice test once, when you've taken the real test once, you are aware of how things go, right? You're more of a pro, you're an expert at how that test day is going to go. You're not going to be surprised by anything. So that when you take that test a second time, when you take the real test a third time, you have that experience, you can use that to do better. So you want to retake that test. Again, depends on how many people, depends on your situation, how many times you want to take it. I would say, 2 to 3 times, 3 times being usually the sweet spot for most tests is a good amount. And again, you want to retake that test not just to get used to it, but also for variance. On any given day, you can do a certain score. Right? You can be lucky or unlucky, whatever it might be. So you want to get a good sampling of your own personal variance, your own personal range, so that hopefully you can get a score closer to the upper end of that. You can have a good day, a lucky day, and do a lot better. So retake that test. Leave yourself hopefully enough time to take the test more than once. Make sure you're scoring properly, or ask for a rescore. So when you're scoring your practice tests, as we talked about previous video, make sure you're not making any mistakes scoring them. In the rare situation where you think your real test has been scored improperly, you can ask for usually a hand rescoring. Again, don't count on this. It costs money, and most of the time it's not going to get you anything. But it's possible. It's happened, where the rescore will actually lead to a gain in points. Score your tests honestly. I mean, it's almost silly to have to say this, but if you're trying to get a sense of where you're at, score your tests honestly. Don't fudge, right? Don't say, oh, I would have gotten that one right. Oh, I made a dumb mistake. I would have gotten that right on the real thing. Trust me, you probably wouldn't. Dumb mistakes account for a huge chunk of the questions that people get wrong. So don't give yourself the benefit of the doubt. It's 100% wrong. Count it as wrong. And then, of course, I know if you're under a lot of pressure, from all different directions, and you feel like you have to report scores that are high just to mitigate that pressure, try to resist that, because you're not doing yourself any favors. It's gonna come back and bite you, and it's gonna be worse. So if you tell, let's say, your parents, oh, I'm getting 2250s in the tests, they're excited, they're happy for you, they're great, they feel relieved themselves, and then you come back from the real test and you got a 1750. That's good. That's no good for anybody, right? You want to know where you're at, and right when you're at that situation, you want to know, okay, I'm around 1750. I have to do X and Y and Z to get myself higher, rather than deluding everybody to thinking you're in a better situation. Because let's say you've got 2 months left between the test that you took and the last test you can take, you want to know, basically it'll suck if you spend the whole summer doing this. You score low in October because you didn't really do what you had to do in the summer practice, and then you've got only 1 month or 2 months to prepare before you have to apply for colleges. It's just an awful situation, so don't put yourself in that situation. And then finally, just be very careful when bubbling in on test day, especially when skipping questions. So make sure you're bubbling in the answer to the question that you're answering to the spot where it should be bubbled, and not to, the one that you had just omitted or anything like that. There's one other one that I wanted to add to this, and that factor is that thing you can do is wait. And by wait, I mean 2 things. Like I said before, sometimes just waiting and retaking the test, because you're used to the testing environment, been there, done that, your score will often rebound on a retake closer to what you got in the practice test. I've seen this happen, right? So someone gets 300 points lower than they expected on the real thing. They wait a month, they take the next test, and they get pretty much on where they would expect, or at least really close. That can happen, just again, based off of the experience, based off of the time factor. But the other issue here is some students do well when they're juniors, when they're in 11th grade, or even when they're in 10th grade. But most students do their best work in the fall of the senior year, the fall of 12th grade. Okay, and there's all kinds of reasons for it, mostly having to do with just maturation, right? You mature. The rate at which your brain is maturing when you're a teen is insane, right? A 6-month period can make a huge difference in your cognition, in your processing speed, in the maturity of how you approach things. So sometimes simply, again, it goes back to retaking tests, not waiting to retake until you're a senior, but like take the test when you're, March of junior year, maybe retake the test in June of junior year. If you're still not where you're at, don't be discouraged, because you still have the best chance, which is October/November of your senior year. Just giving yourself some time to mature, practicing along the way, taking into account all these tips that I've said here and elsewhere. Having a little patience, as hard as it can be, having some patience is the key. A lot of students, for good reason, want to take the test once or take the test twice and be done, right? Oh, I want to take it in May of junior year, and I want that to be the one, and I want to be done. That's nice, and it's great. It could happen, but for most students, it's not realistic. And you need to kind of keep a long-term perspective and realize, if you want to maximize your score, if you don't just want a good score, but your maximum optimal potential score, sometimes you have to wait. You have to be patient and wait until your strongest opportunity to get your highest score, which is in your senior year, in the year that you're applying to colleges. Okay, those are some tips and strategies on how to make your practice test scores hopefully more realistic. Feel free to comment below if you have any questions or if you've had any experiences on this. There's my phone, and I'll talk to you soon. To learn more about Reason Prep's SAT, SAT subject test, and ACT video courses, go to reasonprep.com/enroll, and you can find the link in the description below the video.